I appreciate everyone being here today to have this conversation with the Fair Chance for Housing campaign on women who've been incarcerated, housing, and the relationship to public safety. My name is Alison Wilkey, and I'm the coordinator of the Fair Chance for Housing campaign and also the director of policy and strategy at Community Voices Heard, which is a member-led multiracial organization that builds community power to secure racial, social, and economic justice for all New Yorkers through grassroots organizing, leadership development, policy changes, and creating new models of direct democracy. So the Fair Chance for Housing campaign has one simple purpose. We are committed to ending housing discrimination against people with conviction records. We all know that housing is a human right. It's an essential need. But discrimination based on criminal records is extremely prevalent, and it has a deep impact on the city's housing and shelter crisis. There are too many people living in shelter who have income or assistance to pay rent, but they can't find housing because they keep getting rejected when landlords do a background check. People with convictions are forced to shelter to illegal housing or unsafe living conditions and instability in their housing because of background checks. And the New York City Department of Homeless Services testified last December that 28% of the increase in people living in shelter in the past 1.5 years was people who have conviction records. National research says that 90% of landlords do background checks. A study on New York City landlords showed that when people disclosed having a conviction, landlords and real estate brokers were 50% less likely to even show an apartment. And there was actually little difference in response for minor convictions versus more serious convictions. There are nearly 750,000 New York City residents with a conviction. That's almost 11% of the adult population. So if we don't eliminate barriers for people with convictions, we won't be able to make a dent in the city's housing and homelessness crisis. The Fair Chance for Housing campaign is focused on passing a law in New York City that would make it illegal for landlords to deny someone housing because they have a conviction record. And you can learn more about the campaign at our website, fairchancehousing.org, which I've just put in the chat for everyone. There on the website, you'll find information about the law we're trying to pass, and you can also click the Take Action button to sign up for email updates or to contact your city council representative to tell them to pass Fair Chance for Housing today. Now, before we dive into our conversation, I want to thank several people who made today's event possible. First, thank you to the team at Fortune Society, Sarah, Karen, Sharimer, Kendall, Andre, and Lily. And second, I'd like to thank Darren Mack at the Freedom Agenda. In case you missed it, Darren has been interviewing people on Instagram Live each Tuesday for the last 2 weeks on this topic. So you can watch those videos, those conversations on our Instagram account, which is at fairhousing_NYC. And I just put that in the chat for people. And he'll continue to do these Instagram Live events over the coming months. So please join us on Instagram to continue the conversation. So for our topic today, we have a panel of experts and leaders who are here to talk about the importance of housing for women after incarceration and how it relates to public safety. We will have a discussion among our panelists, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. So if you have a question for our panelists, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit it, and we'll take time at the end to answer some of those questions that have been submitted. So let me start with a short introduction of who our panelists are. I'm just going to do names and titles to start with, and then we'll allow panelists to say a little bit more about themselves. So here today we have with us Marilyn Mateo. She's the producer of Latinx Affairs on WBAI's On the Count program on 99.5 FM. We have Kandra Clark. She's the Vice President of Policy and Strategy at Exodus Transitional Community. We have Leah Faria. She's a community organizer with the Women's Community Justice Association. We also have Donna Hylton, the president and CEO of A Little Piece of Light. So we have an amazing group of women advocates here to talk about this issue of women, housing, and public safety. And so I'm not going to read bios because we all have Google and no one wants to hear me reading your bios. I'd like to hear it from our panelists straight to tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey and how this conversation about the impact of a conviction record on women specifically, and then how that interrelates with housing and public safety is relevant to you either personally or professionally. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that question with Marilyn. Marilyn, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and what you want folks to know.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I was impacted by the criminal legal system over a decade ago, and I'm also a property owner. Prior to that, I was a high school English teacher for 16 years. And after my incarceration, I began working as a senior reentry specialist on Rikers Island because of the injustices that I experienced. I favor individuals that have conviction records. I encourage them to apply for my apartments. I have rented to individuals with conviction records because I understand the challenge that they have. So as a property owner and as a professional, I have actually experienced horrific eviction proceedings with individuals that do not have conviction records. And some of the most pleasant tenants that I've had are those with conviction records. So I'm so against the discrimination in housing against individuals with legal involvement as a result. And I want to be a voice for the voiceless because we are a minority. And when I came home, the mortgage companies and bank companies actually discriminated against me because of my conviction record and did not want me to refinance. I'm currently fighting a huge corporate bank with an amazing team of attorneys to allow me to refinance. And it's been going on 10 years since I've been home. And I'm still fighting it because of a conviction record where they're trying to take the property from me, although my payments were up to date. And I have successful tenants that, yes, have had legal involvement, but they have been the most pleasant individuals.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marilyn. And thanks for highlighting an important part here. I think when we talk about housing, our minds are going to rental housing, but from your personal experience, it's also about being a homeowner and pathways to home ownership. And we know that in America, that's how people build wealth, is through home ownership. And so that's an important part of the conversation here that I appreciate you bringing into the room. So let me go next to Kandra Clark. Kandra, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, housing, I think I want to start just with kind of like some of my personal stories with housing. Housing has been an issue for me my entire life. Even growing up, I grew up in domestic violence. And I remember I come originally from a village of 850 people, so we don't have resources to kind of get out of those situations. And I always remember my mom saying, if she were to leave my stepdad, that we would be homeless and that we would not have a house, right? And that was like she wouldn't be able to take care of us, right? And that was a constant reason, I think, why she stayed. And my mom unfortunately passed away at 46, at the age of 46 from cirrhosis. And lived her whole life in that kind of space, right? And then being a teenager, I got kicked out when I was a teen. I ended up getting pregnant, so I was a homeless pregnant teen, and ended up going in and out of the jail systems constantly. So for about 10 years, I cycled in and out of jail and prison from multiple states. And I remember, being released with nothing but the clothes on your body and the shoes on your feet, and you having to figure out what you were going to do to get enough money to get a hotel room for the night, which for women is often very dangerous, even more so dangerous, I think, than men, of what we kind of have to do in the streets to survive, especially as young women. So I think of all the times when I could have been, that system could have been interrupted by me having a safe, stable place to live, and how many times I had to cycle in and out of that, and all the trauma and abuse I experienced while cycling in and out of that, especially as a young woman. And then, coming out of prison in New York City, I was married at the time because I got married when I was on Rikers Island. When I got released, I didn't even really know my husband. I barely knew him before I went in. So again, housing became an issue. About 8 months after I came home, my husband kicked me out. I was on parole, not on the lease, which was a very strange thing because it was actually NYCHA, but I think the parole officer didn't know. So I didn't know what to do because I couldn't tell my parole officer and then get kicked out permanently. I wasn't even supposed to be there if NYCHA knew it was going to be an issue. So just the constant conflict that you're in. And I remember what it was like going to John Jay College full-time and working at the Fortune Society full-time and couch surfing on my friend's couch in Harlem. And that was my life, even while I was working full-time and going to school full-time for so long, that I think people often assume that folks who are experiencing homelessness are not working to get out of that. And that's just not the case, right? I've worked with so many people, and usually when we're experiencing homelessness, we're also trying to do 50,000 other things to get out of that situation. And it's very hard when you don't have stable housing to maintain your homework, to cook, just the whole 9 yards, maintain your nutrition, take care of your meds, everything. So I'll never forget, getting my first studio and then my first 1-bedroom apartment. I didn't get a 1-bedroom apartment until 2020. I was an executive at Exodus before I finally was able to get a 1-bedroom apartment. And I experienced a lot of discrimination. I live in Forest Hills, which is a very privileged community. And I'm now officially a community board member. So I'm hoping to change hearts and minds and help us not experience the same kind of discrimination that I experienced when I first moved here. But being able to have a home, I felt like in 2020, it was the first time I ever really had a home. And it's sad to think that, I'm getting to be 40, and it's finally that time in my life where I actually have a place that I call home. And again, in my community, I'm really trying to do my part to lead with facts over fear, because we hear that a lot. And I think speaking about this bill in particular, there's a lot of fear around it. And it's because people are not honing in on the facts. So as a community board member, I'm really hoping that I can lead in with the facts and help change hearts and minds. And then today, in my professional capacity, I work as the Vice President of Policy and Strategy with Exodus Transitional Community. Exodus is a preventative reentry and advocacy organization. We have 6 reentry hotels, which are emergency housing. We house about 900 folks that are coming home from jail and prison. We also just got awarded 2 transitional housing models that are going to be opening in July. And then I'm working with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which a huge shout out to them. I'd be lost without them in this housing realm, to develop our own affordable and supportive housing, right? Because again, like Marilyn said, it's so important for us to be able to not only rent homes, but think long terms about buying houses, which unfortunately we're still discriminated against decades later. And in my capacity, I'm also on the board of the Women's Community Justice Association, and I oversee our women's project, which is in partnership with A Little Piece of Light, Donna, who you're hear from, and I'm on her board as well. So I get the privilege of working with women every day who are coming home and trying to get them into permanent housing. So the process of getting into permanent housing, people are discriminated against constantly. I've had brokers, I've called them, and they've asked for certificates of disposition, and I've politely told them, we're not going to go that route and work with you, and actually not work with them, even when they try to get back in. And I'm like, no, like, I'm done. If that's going to be the attitude that you're bringing, then I don't even want to try to build a relationship with a developer or broker who's like that. But again, I constantly see women being separated from their children, women who have experienced domestic violence, been on both sides of the justice system, right? So there's been cases that they've had, but also cases against them. And the breaking up of families and what we're doing, especially to women, we could do so much better by providing them with that stable housing. And we always say, when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate the family. And unfortunately, I see that every day. So, I'm very blessed that I now understand the housing landscape, and I'm able to work through all the different vouchers and help transition people. But no matter what we try to do as a city, and I'll talk about this later when we talk about what the plan should be for Mayor Adams, no matter what we do on that front end, if we still discriminate against people and fair chance for housing does not get passed, we're still going to run into these roadblocks. We're going to create new housing, new legislation, like other new laws and policies. But by not passing this, then people are still going to be blocked because of their criminal conviction, which really defeats the purpose of trying to do all those other pieces. And so I'll talk a little bit about that later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kandra. Thank you for touching on so many aspects of this issue from both your personal and your professional experience. Appreciate that. Speaking of Women's Community Justice Association, let's bring Leah into the conversation. Leah, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah, and I am a community organizer for the Women's Community Justice Association. And I just want to touch base on how I'm impacted both personally and professionally. When I think about the conviction record, when I think about the discriminatory housing, when I think about the fear that surrounds public safety, I am that woman. You know, I served 22 years in prison, and when I was released, I was discriminated against for housing. So, you know, it's hard to think about, you know, justice when you have this injustice system. And it's going to have to take the communities to take a look in the mirror to realize that when you think about public safety, that the community has to do their part, you know, and that's where I come in with my professionalism as an organizer. I'm on the ground, you know, whether I'm in bodegas, whether I'm in shelters, whether I'm on Rikers Island, you know, just being present and doing the work, because it can't get done without the community support. And like Kandra said, you have to base it on facts and not fear. And there's so much that's going on in the communities today with the violence, and people are fearful. But then that's our job to really educate and inform them, you know, that what is really happening to people, to the returning citizens. And when you talk about women, if you want women to be empowered, you have to provide women with the unique resources that they need, you know, because when you empower a woman, you empower communities, because we are the backbones of our community. So, you know, it just starts with the women, and passing the Fair Chance for Housing Act is definitely in the right direction, because like Kandra, I have to always piggyback over Kandra, when you have that proper, you know, place to lay your head at night, you're able to really get yourself grounded, you're able to move forward. And oftentimes people aren't going to jeopardize that safety to reoffend. So when you talk about public safety, you have to really look at all the dynamics, and it's going to take the community to do their part. And yeah, and I'm down to do my part as well.
Thank you, Leah. Thanks so much for that. So now we'll go to Donna Hylton. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Alison. Hi, everybody. Good morning or the afternoon. So just for the disclaimer, I'm right in Albany right now. Just handled 3 advocacy lobby initiatives, and I'm right in front of the one for housing, actually. I'm parked right here. I thought it was apropos to do that. Housing and health, which kind of tie in together. So as my colleagues have said, you know, well, first let me say how my experience with housing. You know, people don't really understand, when you go into prison, into the system at a very young age. I was an adolescent. I had no experience with anything. Didn't know anything about Con Ed, didn't know how to get an apartment, didn't know anything, absolutely nothing at all. And coming out 27 years later, I'm being thrust into a society that you're not just starting over, you're starting probably for the first time, a lot of things, right? It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to navigate. I was fortunate enough to get a job 3 weeks after I got out. And with that job, I was able to save up and okay, I can look for an apartment. I had help because we had a housing manager, right? And that was at Providence House. And so she was helping, had other people trying to help, because I really didn't even know how to do that, right? I remember back in the days, you look in the want ads, you're looking to the newspaper, and so they don't have those things anymore. And that's what my memory, was based on. So I had someone help me. And then when I went to this management company, I had to go sit at the table like I was back at trial. I had to go sit around a table with individuals selling myself, why I would be a good candidate to get housing, to get an apartment. to base their trust on, just to like really sell my soul. But it was traumatized. That whole entire experience was traumatizing because I had to, and I had to like go all the way back from my being a little girl in Jamaica, all the way up until I'm in front of that at that table. And you know, it gutted me. And it was that experience. I said, I never want any other person, no woman, to go through that. No woman to go through that, because we've been through enough. We've been through enough. And so as I started working other jobs and then trying to help other women get housing, I recognized how difficult and how lacking that it is. It is, not was, it is. Women have the least amount of resources and overall in our communities than anyone else. And women that are impacted, Black women that are impacted, Black immigrant women that are impacted, right? And so I recognized that, and it hurt my heart because there was one woman that came out from doing a significant amount of time who had cancer 3 times, almost died 2 times. So she was very frail and fragile and just couldn't manage a lot. And they threw her into a 3-quarter housing situation. She couldn't manage that. She couldn't manage that. And so fighting to try to get her a bed or someplace that she could heal and go through her medical issues, right? And I remember what was said to me, well, you know, Donna, we really don't have enough for women. We really don't have any beds for women. And that hurt, because why don't you have beds for women? Who are you fighting for then? What is this movement about if women are not included and not at the forefront? What is this movement about? Is it a joke? Especially since women have become the fastest growing population that have been incarcerated. We have gone from 2,000, a little over 2,000 women to almost 300,000 women in the system. So I just said that, you know, one of the things that I'm going to focus on is housing. And by the grace of God, we have it at a little piece of light. We've helped women, we've placed women into housing before we had our own housing opportunities, right? So we're thankful for that, but extra thankful that we're able to have, we have 3 locations now, actually. Happy about that. So, you know, but the struggle that comes with, and now to maintain that as well, make sure that, you know, we can maintain those safe spaces for them, where they don't have to struggle and they don't have to worry about things, that they have a place to lay their heads and not worry. And to Leah's point, we have some unique issues, right? I've always said that we have some unique issues, you know, and that we have to recognize that and understand that. And we all do this walk differently. But the most important thing that all of us need, all of us, women especially, is a safe place to lay our heads. Nothing is perfect, but if we have a place to lay our heads, we're starting with something. And that's why this fight is important. That's why passing fair chance is important. Because we need this opportunity. We can't talk about public safety, again, the echo. We can't talk about public safety if we don't concern ourselves with people who have a place to lay their heads, if their bellies are full. We still have kids going to bed hungry. If we don't give them some kind of employment, sustainable employment, we can't continue to talk. We can't. It makes absolutely no sense. It's actually psychotic to continue a conversation when we're not putting the measures in place to take care of these things, take care of human beings. And so that's why this fight is important for me.
Thank you so much, Donna. We have such a powerful panel of experts here. There's so much strength and resilience in this room that I'm a little bit in awe right now, and also just feeling this deep sense of regret that so many people have had to go through these types of experiences. It's amazing that you're all working on this to make sure that other people don't have to go through it, but no one should have had to go through the experiences that you guys have all gone through. So let's start with a question that really gets into the issue of why this is so important for women. So we know that women are the glue in their families and their communities, and this is especially true for Black and Latina women. When women are incarcerated and then are released from incarceration with that conviction record, how does it impact their families and the broader community? I think all of you guys have touched on this a little bit, but let's dive in deeper. what is the broad impact? Because I think so often when we think about the impact of incarceration or we think about reentry, we're thinking on the individual level, but the effects really do spread out from there. So let's dive into that a little bit, and you guys can just jump in, whoever wants to start.
I will start. Echoing what Donna mentioned, there is a rebuilding of mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects that are affected during and after incarceration, and sometimes even before. And how are women supposed to be the glue of a family while addressing trauma, particularly not having stable housing? Housing should be the last of a person's worry. It is a basic human right. Yet those impacted have to fight their demons, try to include themselves back in society, try to convince people of their worthiness, and struggle as to where they're going to lay their heads. Lack of housing or the threat of losing existing housing is additional trauma, and it's also a catalyst to the existing trauma's resistance to healing. The broader community will be affected, and that homelessness is then being encouraged and enhanced by mental health issues and some physical health issues. And it's a cycle that can be broken if housing for legally impacted individuals, especially women, would not be a challenge. Because it's available, it's just not available to us at all times. And that's what I have an issue with. And that is why that as a landlady, I offer these opportunities to individuals, because I was there and I'm still there and I'm fighting it.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. Does anyone else want to jump in on this?
I'll go real fast. Definitely the impact is broader than just the individual. You know, you have mothers, you have sisters, you have daughters, you know, you have leaders, you know, in the community. And when we are impacted, our children are impacted, their ability to grow, their ability to learn, the communities. I mean, it's so broad to where, you know, it's like a domino effect, you know, and what's happening is that people are being re-traumatized. They're being re-traumatized from entering the system, during the system, and once they are released from the system. And it has to change, because people cannot blossom and grow and be who they need to be for themselves, as well as their families, as well as their communities. This is why we are faced with so much dilemma, because society are failing the women, they're failing the children, they're failing even the fathers, okay? And they need to really take a look in the mirror. It's systemic re-traumatization that's happening, and it's so much bigger than just the individual. And until they get that up here and they realize it and they start implementing systemic changes, what's going to happen is going to be a revolving cycle. So it's like people doesn't realize how broad the spectrum is of the impact. And yeah, and I'm this forum right here with all of these leaders are really exposing the fact and amplifying the problem.
And I think just to add to what Leah said, because I see it a lot and I've experienced it also. When you're inside, a lot of times the women are the caregivers, right? It's always us kind of holding things down, even when folks are outside. So oftentimes when the mother, if we have children, if the mother goes in, the women often go into the system, right? And ACS and the system, it's very hard to get access to your kids while you're incarcerated. It's very rare that they actually get to visit you. The visits are supposed to be set up. They're rarely ever set up. And I think now with COVID, it's even worse. Plus the prisons are not designed for children to really come visit. And so as women, it's often very conflicting, because you want to see your kid, but you don't want your kid to see you in that space or to experience the discrimination, harassment, and trauma that they often have to experience from correctional officers and just from the culture of corrections, right? So that's another huge conversation that we need to change. So now, you know, you didn't have access to them the way that you should have while you were inside. The bond that you had formed, it took me 9 years to rebuild my bond with my son, right? It does not happen overnight. It takes a really long time often. And not having stable housing when you come home prevents the courts to release your children back to you. So literally, by not providing housing to women specifically, we are keeping families separated. And that trickle effect, you know, your child is more likely to become incarcerated. They're less likely to finish school. The whole ripple effect of, it's like this intergenerational cycle, and it's really ruined generations of folks. It's you know, put a lot of trauma and hardship on generations of folks that should have never, they didn't even commit the crime to begin with, right? We're talking about the children and the grandchildren and kind of that cycle of it. And I think something else we don't talk about, and this only because I guess I'm always trying to find a space to mention it, and there's never usually a good space, but this is right here. Because another thing that we're doing by incarcerating women, and then when we release them, you often can't adopt children because you have felony convictions, and you can't sponsor children either. So, you know, I hear this regularly where a lot of women were incarcerated. If you did 2 decades, that was your prime time to have children, right? So you kind of missed out on that opportunity biologically to have kids. And so now, like, I have a really good friend who did 2 decades inside. She would be the best mother ever. And she wanted to adopt a baby from another country that would have had a really great life over here with her. And because she's a felon, they refused to let her, right? So I think it's so much broader even than thinking about your own biological children, but as nurturers and the caregivers and the most likely to adopt, right? And kind of help support and foster, we can't do any of that because we have a criminal conviction. It doesn't matter how good of a person we are now, what we've accomplished now, what our bankroll is now, what our housing situation is now. They only look at the conviction history. And so it's really perpetual punishment. And that's why it's so important for fair chance for housing to be passed, because it will end that perpetual punishment that we all experience with respect to housing.
I just want to jump in and add to that because it made me think. We're always talking about women, mothers, and we look in the context of a child that's young. I spent 27 years in prison. I came out to a child that was an adult, that is an adult. And the difficulties navigating that relationship, that bond, there's so much trauma. There's so much of issues of abandonment, anger, mistrust, so many things. There's hate as well. Right? There's hate as well. And so those are some of the things, like, you know, we try to look at a little piece of light. It's not just women with young children, it's women that now have grown children. And how do you look at repairing that relationship? Oftentimes, you know, it's going to take a minute to do that, but you need that safety net, right? You need that safe space to do that. You need all the resources and all the actual love and as from a community as possible, because there's thousands of us. There's thousands of us, right? And so we have to really understand that. And I try to get people to look at both sides. We have children that are adults, we have children that are young children. There's a lot of us that have adult children, and we need that extra support as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donna. I think we've talked about just so many areas of life and areas of relationship where, you know, incarceration and then all of the stigma that comes from that really impacts deeply. And I want to actually dive into that stigma a little bit. People often think that background checks are a way to ensure safety because they tell you the character. They think that a background check is equivalent to a character check. You know, they tell you the character of a person renting an apartment or the character of a person employing it. And I just want to dive into that question. Is the assumption that a background check tells you about the character of a person true or false? And why? Because I think we see it over and over again. When something happens, people will say, well, there should have been background checks, you know, which is all about limiting access. Anytime you're doing background checks, you're limiting access. So how are we diving into this broader cultural assumption of a conviction being an equivalent to, a mark of someone's character or even a predictor of the future?
I really think that statement is completely false based on my experience as a tenant of the mortgage company, as a landlord of tenants, and of tenants that have had legal involvement. Again, I praise the tenants that I've housed because they are outstanding citizens and individuals of society. And doing a background check, I'm more concerned about their finances as opposed to their person. I'm not here to judge individuals for who they are. I am here to make sure my rent is paid. I am here to make sure that my property is well taken care of and that my neighborhood is appreciated, not depreciated. And again, I echo what I mentioned before, that I've had individuals without conviction records that have destroyed my properties, that have not paid rent in a year or so, that were a menace in our community. And they didn't have any legal record, and I did background checks. So now when I do background checks and I see a conviction, not that I'm not fazed by it, but I dig in a little more. Let me learn about the person. Do I want to be this person's neighbor? Because not due to a conviction, but I need to learn the person and not go by what's on paper. Because if everything else checks out, then there's no reason for me not to rent to the individual at all. Everyone evolves, everyone changes, whether it's good or bad, but everyone evolves. And I believe in giving individuals second chances because their history and their experiences doesn't always predict the future. So that's where I stand with that. I believe that that statement is completely false.
Listen, repeat that statement.
Yeah, just the statement is a background check, does a background check tell you about the character of a person?
Hold on one second. I have my housing coordinator here. I want her to respond to that because she has a lot to say. And she does our housing, and I think it's important to share that. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So with the background check, it doesn't define who a person is, but it gives you some insight of where they've been, what they've been through. I don't discriminate. I do the housing. So usually what I do an assessment, an intake. My assessment is just really basic to see what their needs are outside of housing, because we don't turn no one away. So looking at the background is just basically looking at where their needs and need to be met at and what service we can help them with outside of housing. And I say that because, like myself, I was fortunate not to have to worry about housing because my mom had a home. But I was just telling Donna, I had the home, but I had to still house my family members who came out of prison. I had one who was incarcerated for rape. I still let him come with my niece in the house, but I put him downstairs and her upstairs. I had to give him another chance. People don't know what it is to give chances because they haven't yet to be there, or it hasn't been them. Today, me, tomorrow could be you. And I always say that. So with that, it doesn't tell you who the person is, but it will give you insight. If you just open your mind a little bit, instead of looking at the convicted felon and seeing human being.
And I definitely want to add to that because, when first of all, the background check industry is unregulated and it's corporate. So I always like to throw that out there because, if we all know that there can be a lot of negative things that go on in corporate America and corruption. And we know that they're tied to the bail bondsman industry, which is super corrupt. So, I also look at the source of where the information is coming from, because I know when people run background checks on me, there's charges that come up that were dismissed and shouldn't even be on your background, right? And then I also help attorneys and court advocates sometimes just do exactly what AJ was talking about. looking at the rap sheet from a different level, right? So if you look at my rap sheet, I have charges going back to the age of 15. I had 4 arrests from the ages of 16 to 17 around paraphernalia, running away, underage drinking. So in my head, if I were to look at that and see that from a young person, well, clearly there's some dysfunction going on in their house. Instead of saying, oh, they're a convicted criminal, maybe we should say, oh, there might be a whole bunch of trauma that's going on in the house. And this is why, you know, there's status offenses, and this young person is going to end up in this cycle long term, because we know that's what happens. So I think it's also about, if you really wanted to do a background check to get more information, how Marilyn and AJ were talking about, it's looking past, and because the background check doesn't tell you the root causes of incarceration, it doesn't list them right out front, but if you read between the lines, you can clearly see that. And I feel like that should be taken into more consideration than the conviction, right? It's looking at someone's history, looking at how resilient they are, that they've been able to go through this and survive. That's a tenant I would want. Somebody that's resilient and that doesn't give up, and that I know is going to make sure that their rent's paid on time, because they've already went through all this hell and back, and they don't want to go through that again, right? So I say the same thing. The people that we work with, it's once they get apartments, because they have a conviction history, they're making sure they're making all their rent on time. They're making sure they go to their employment on time. They don't want to ever experience homelessness again. And they don't take for granted how hard it was for them to get this apartment because of the discrimination we experience. So I'm always telling landlords, it's actually a benefit if you rent to somebody who's justice impacted, because they're probably going to be a better tenant.
Well,
And the background check, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think you guys are raising really good points about opening your mind, but how do we get more people to open their minds? Because the stigma is huge and it's real. I mean, I think, Kandra, you were saying it before about facts over fear mongering. The fear mongering is real. It's been very real around our efforts to pass fair chance for housing. You know, that we've had the real estate industry sending out emails to landlords saying, do you want criminals living in your building? Do you want drug dealers living in your building? So how do we get over that real like stigma that gets used to just fear monger without facts?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something real quick. I think that when it comes to I think you have to educate. You have to be present. You know, you can't sit, you know, in an office and do the work. You have to be on the ground, because you have to get with the community, because the community are the individuals that's going to go to the legislators, you know, and advocate for fair chance for housing. But it's a little bit more than that. It's going to your local mom and pop stores, going to the, you know, going and speaking out, using your own personal experience. You know, because it's not taboo anymore to be justice impacted. There's so many people that are impacted, so many communities. So it's about really going out there, using our personal experiences, you know, and educating people to let them know that housing is a human right. You know, you're not doing somebody a favor by giving them a decent place to lay their head at night. It's a human right, you know, and it's really about getting the officials, because the people that make these decisions, we have to be the people to go out there and advocate, even for the ones that don't have a voice. We have to be that voice. We have to let them know the issues that's going on. We have to amplify it. So it takes the work to go to Albany. It takes the work to do the cold calling. It takes the work to send the emails. It takes the work to knock on the doors. You have to be in it to win it. That's the only way it's going to get done. You have to put the effort. You have to be boots on the ground, and you have to, you know, let it be known that this is something. It's not a privilege. It's a right.
And overall, you know, pointing out discrimination, they keep saying they don't discriminate, but they do. You know, that's just the bottom line. It's just a bunch of discrimination, right? You know, we talk about criminal background, but you're looking at the whole history background of an individual. You're just looking at the criminal aspect, but what happened before they became a criminal? But how some of them, you know what I mean, may not have been committed a crime, but been convicted of a crime. How about that? You know, but we so busy judging, you know, and that's what we do. So, you know, us as the people, you know what I'm saying? We up here in Albany now, and one thing I heard up here is just change the leaders, right? When we get the voting, right, we can vote them out. We have the right to vote them out and continue to do the work. and not just believing it. I will vote you out. I don't care what color skin you are. I will vote you out if you're not riding with the people. And that's just simple for me today. You know, personal experience. And I just feel like a lot of them don't like to see themselves in our shoes because they think they're better than. They think they're above some stuff. And this is why they make those decisions. I'm gonna call out Trump. You know, we know who Trump is, right? He was one of them, right? Yeah. But we have leaders today, right? Who's been talking about changing so many laws, right? Less is more has been changed. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now we're talking about humans, healthcare. I was just standing out there with the healthcare. They was Community Not Cages is here. ASA is here up in Albany. I'm talking about 3. And I'm boots on the ground at all 3 and hearing like overall the suffering that we do, that what we going through, you know, as individuals, and we have to come up here and continue to tell them our pain. They see it. They choose to ignore it. That's all. You know, but as we're doing the work right here, I just feel like if we continue to do the work and our voices be heard, something will change. Something will change.
Thank you.
Can I just add to, you know, I think in addition to educating, we really need to also be bold and hold people accountable. We have elected officials that are using fear over facts, and they need to be held accountable. We have community members. And, you know, when I'm having these, I know sugar's better than spice, but when you're having conversations, and, you know, it's 3 years of me doing this work in my community specifically, like enough is enough. You can't 3 years later, after learning all of these facts, if you still want to be NIMBYism and say not in my backyard, then that's racism. There's other isms that go into that. It's not just about safety. And you got to hold people accountable to that and be bold and call them out on their bullshit too. I think we need more of that sometimes, because we really let elected officials kind of say whatever, or community board members say whatever, and no one holds them accountable. And they're using fear and lying. They're not using facts.
Thanks, Kandra. And I think, Marilyn, you wanted to jump into the conversation here.
Well, it was already said, so I don't want to sound redundant, but I do agree that educating landlords and property owners, having workshops by experts in the legal field regarding discrimination, as well as holding individuals accountable. So a combination of everything that was said was basically what I was going to state.
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, I think that that's really important. And in the context of discrimination, you know, we have a lot of elected officials that, you know, say that they want to address discrimination. But the fact is, we're not going to address racial discrimination in housing unless we address criminal records discrimination, because 80% of the people who have convictions in New York City are Black or Latinx. Like, that's the straight facts on there. We can't address overall discrimination unless we start dismantling this whole system of perpetual punishment that follows people after the criminal legal system, in addition to dismantling the criminal legal system and all of the harm that it causes. And so I'm going to use that as a segue here to talk about public safety in the criminal legal system. So recently, there was a survey of 62,000 New York City residents, and they were asked to offer their opinions on a range of issues. And one of those issues was public safety. So adults who completed this survey were asked to pick 3 public safety priorities in the survey. And they chose affordable housing and reducing homelessness most often as their priority, their top public safety priority. And this is in spite of the fact that a lot of the other answers that they could have been chosen were around policing and more punishment. And yet, most New York City residents picked affordable housing and reducing homelessness as their public safety priority. So let's dive into that. Why is access to housing the pathway to public safety?
Let me jump in on that. First of all, common sense, it should dictate, right? That the best thing to do is to find somebody a safe space to lay their heads. I'm pretty sure everyone that's homeless didn't want to be homeless, didn't want to be on the streets. I'm pretty sure about that. even with mental health, mental health does not dictate someone's choices either, right? They have no choice because mental health has taken over. And so there's no choices there. We put too much on people that have, serious issues. So to find people a place where they can feel safe. It reminds me of like prison. You're thrown into prison, whether of guilt or innocence, but you're thrown into prison. And then you have to learn how to become violent if you've never been violent, so you can survive a very violent place. A person's all stripped of their housing. So they're thrust into the street. So they have to find ways to survive, even if that means being violent. It's just circle, right? It's just a circle of continuous harm and trauma and so much stuff. So people get that. People don't want more police in their communities. Black folks do not want more police in our communities, period. Because they're not there to help us feel safe. They don't help us feel safe. When they respond to someone going through a psychosis or whatever, even a domestic violence situation, why are they responding? Why are they responding? Why aren't people that are trained to understand and have walked the walk and get it, the ones responding? And people know that. People are not stupid. That's why they didn't pick policing over housing, you know what I'm saying, and getting people off the street. People know. We need to concern ourselves with where people have a place to lay their heads again, and if people have something to put on their stomachs, if you're hungry, it is just our innate, it's just, we're hungry, we're gonna wanna eat. We're tired, we're gonna wanna sleep. We're thirsty, we're gonna wanna drink. These are just basic instincts that we cannot change. So when you take these things away from people, what are they gonna do? They're gonna find ways to do it, even if it means causing harm. Why? Because that is just something that's instinctual, and that is just our God-given rights, God-given instincts. And people are not stupid, period.
And let me add to that. You know, you just seen last week, right? Officers respond at a grocery store for an 8-year-old boy with a bag of potato chips. You cannot see that he was hungry. The only thing you did was cuff him, put him in back there and car, treat him like a criminal. An 8-year-old. Come on. Enough is enough. When do we like just going unnoticed? It hurts me. I cried. Are you kidding me? It's not even an innocent little boy. That man said, I'll pay for it. The cop said no. Cuffed him and put him back in the car, saying he'd take him to his mother. No, why don't you pay for the bag of chips and then ask him what else did he want? How about that? That's why when it comes to public safety, it starts with them. The policing, we don't feel safe because they don't know how to protect us. They refuse to protect us. They're the one who start the trauma in our community. There's kids that are scared of the police. Don't feel safe. Someone call 911, someone hesitate to call 911. Why? Because if you come in, are you going to shoot my mommy? Or you're going to shoot my daddy? Or you're going to shoot me? So then what happens? If they know a gun in the house, they go pick up a gun, or they go find a gun, and then they start. It's the trauma, man, that just, from the police, you don't, public safety. I don't feel safe. So yes, it's a lot of them roaming the streets. They refuse to go into the shelters. They don't feel safe there. Right there in New York City, I don't get on the train. I don't get on the train at all. I am scared. I am scared to death to get on the train. we're not safe in our own community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Bringing the point home that we're all safe when we have our basic human needs met. Leah, I see you have your hand up. Why don't you jump in on this?
Oh, trauma is real. Mental illness is real. When you talk about public safety, yes, housing is a need. I have witnessed people reoffend because they were homeless. Wintertime, oh, I'm going back to prison to get 3 hots in a cot. Okay, that's serious. People should not have to sacrifice their freedom to have somewhere to lay their head at night. Okay, public safety means, communities, like the city, reinvesting into these communities. Public safety is bringing trauma-informed professionals into our communities. Public safety is also supporting returning citizens. And not just from prison, but at the entry of prison, because that is where re-entry starts. The process starts the minute somebody is incarcerated. So it's different dynamics, and it doesn't come in one particular form or fashion. Public safety is needed, and we don't need the police to go. We need to be able to police our own communities, sustain our own communities. And that's what it's going to take for the community to step in and say, we can handle this and keep the police out. Because just like Donna and AJ said, the police are coming in and they are re-traumatizing people who have trauma issues that are not even resolved. So this is why you have violence being perpetuated over and over again. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Kandra or Marilyn, do you want to jump in? Why is access to housing our pathway to public safety?
Well, as the media loves to portray, that crime has become fierce in the blame of homelessness and mental health, housing is essential. It allows individuals to flourish, stable housing, that is, not temporary housing. We're talking about a permanent home where individuals are not worried about losing the roof over their head. I know shelters are riddled with criminal incidents leading to arrests, creating a criminal record, thus perpetuating the homelessness pandemic. Because I currently work for the New York City Criminal Justice Agency in Queens, and many of the cases that I observe are women in shelters that have had disputes or physical altercations with other women in shelters. They're arrested, brought to court, arraigned. Now they have a record. How are they to get an apartment? And many enter the shelter system not wanting to, but having to in order to secure some kind of housing in the future. That shouldn't be the only alternative. That shouldn't be the only option. Public safety would only be positively enhanced and more secured if housing wasn't such a challenge for individuals with convictions. There's a million positives that can come out of this. So I encourage that we pass the Fair Housing Act. I encourage it so much from a landlord's perspective and as a tenant of the mortgage and banking industry. I encourage it so much.
Thank you, Marilyn. Well, so just a reminder to our participants, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function that's in Zoom to just pose your question, and we'll do another question and then we'll go to some Q&A. So please ask your questions there. But let's talk about the solutions then here. So the mayor is developing his housing plan as we speak. And so I'd like to hear, why should fair chance housing legislation be part of that plan? What else should be part of that plan? And who should the mayor be listening to develop this plan? Because I think we all know that real estate developers and people who make a huge profit off of real estate want to be listened to, but who else should the mayor actually be listening to develop his housing plan, and really what should be a part of that?
I'll start this one. So, in addition to really listening to those with lived experience, I think that should be your top priority. There's already some plans that we've discussed and several of us have been a part of, right? So the Reinvestment Commission, the report's been issued. We have an entire section specifically on housing, where we talk about investing in emergency housing, which includes the Mach J reentry hotels. Transitional housing to scale. The city cuts transitional housing costs to $50,000 a bed a year, where we are spending almost $600,000 a year to detain or incarcerate someone on Rikers Island. So again, funding solutions to scale. We know that incarceration does not work, that it leads to a higher rates of recidivism. We know that stable housing leads to lower rates of recidivism. Why would we not want to invest in those solutions to scale? Instead, we make nonprofits come up with millions of dollars in private money and kind of scrambling all over the world, trying to make the housing system work in transitional housing for folks. And the importance of the emergency housing is because of the HUD definition for chronically homelessness, which deems folks eligible for supportive housing. People, if you're in an institution for 90 days or more, which includes jail, your clock has to start back over for you to be deemed homelessness. So that is why it's so important to have emergency transitional housing landing pads for people who qualify based on their serious mental health, but don't qualify based on the eligibility of chronic homelessness, right? And so we can help get them stabilized during that time while we're waiting for their clock to run out so they can actually qualify. So that's really, really important. And then creating more supportive housing and affordable housing to scale. All of those are listed, very clearly detailed, outlined. It's been a very collaborative approach of justice impacted leaders and non-justice impacted leaders coming together and saying, hey, here's how we can fix the housing crisis in New York City. So all that work's already been done for the administration. If they would just take some time to really review that and listen and take those recommendations to heart. Another really important report that got released is the Corporation for Supportive Housing report. It's called Advancing Supportive Housing Solutions to Reduce Homelessness for People Impacted by the Criminal Legal System. Housing the estimated 2,589 people on Rikers in any given year that needs supportive housing would cost New York City $1.2 billion less than putting them in jail for that year. So we could be fiscally responsible. We could save $1.2 billion a year by putting folks into supportive housing units versus incarcerating them. When I think of the women on Rosie's is the female center, female incarceration facility on Rikers Island. There's like 250, there might be close to 300 now. 86% of those women meet BRAD H requirements, which means they have serious mental health concerns and medically would benefit from supportive housing. So I just threw out that $1.2 billion number savings. I know that was for 2,000 people, but even on the smaller scale of women right now, what we could do in the city right now is create supportive housing for them, get them off the island, and we would save millions, right there. So I always talk about these two reports and all the data that we have in it. And these are facts that we've laid out. This is real facts, not just morally responsible, but fiscally responsible facts. And these are all ways that we could improve public safety and reduce recidivism. If we did all of that in that housing plan that I just laid out, but we did not pass fair chance for housing, it would be a lip service to this population, because yet again, our folks would be discriminated against based on their conviction histories. So supportive housing, you have your own apartment, you have a lease, you have supportive services next to you, but it's your own apartment. People are blocked from supportive housing because landlords discriminate against them because of their conviction. So here's the folks that everyone wants off the streets, right? Because they have serious mental health concerns and it is less safe for them to just be roaming on the streets. So let's give them the housing and the stability they need, save the city a whole bunch of money in the process, and also be doing what's right, right? I think of that. I think that, you know, listening to us who've been doing this work for decades is really key to the city administration getting it right. And I'll pass it to whoever's next.
Yeah, thanks, Kandra. I mean, I think there's so much in what you said, and both on like the budget and how much we're devoting here and where we're putting it should be fiscally responsible, and investing in jails and prison isn't fiscally responsible. But also budgets are moral documents. They are moral documents. They reflect our values. And so where we're putting money in budgets should reflect our values. And do we want people to have health? Do we want people to have stability? And if that's the case, if we want New Yorkers to thrive, then our budgets need to reflect that. And the investments need to go into the things that will help people thrive. And that is not jails, and that is not prisons. And that is not the shelter system. It's permanent housing for folks. Someone else want to jump in? What do we need to tell Mayor Adams?
Yes, we definitely need to let the mayor know that the fair chance for housing legislation should be the nucleus of his plan. For all the reasons that we've all stated during this webinar. I am a firm believer that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And as a former police officer himself, I'm sure he may have witnessed the injustices. He's dealt with homeless individuals. He's dealt with incarcerated individuals. He's dealt with, I mean, almost every issue as he boasts about his experience. So with all of that being said, let's make this legislation the nucleus of his plan.
Yeah, thank you. Donna?
I just agree with everything that was just said, because I mean, people keep asking the same questions. They already know. You know the answer to the questions. We really shouldn't even be asking the same questions over and over and over again. It's insanity. It's insanity. They know the solutions. It's simple. It really is simple. Every hole that you see in New York, you see a sign, new building, right? Residential or commercial or both or mix and that, what all these other things. Where's the affordable housing? Where's the housing for people? All these there are buildings that could be fixed up. They're abandoned, could be fixed up. Employ people that don't have a job to fix them up, and then give them the housing that can provide too. So you could do two things at one time here. Give them the employment and also give them the opportunity to have the housing. You know, it's crazy where all they're thinking about, we have people, we have profit over people right now. We're profiting over people's lives. You know, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, real estate, housing. But who's profiting? Not the people that really need it, not the people who are in need, not the people that are suffering. So it's obvious what needs to be done. It's really obvious. So it's just, you know, to ask these questions, they know the answer, they know the solutions. And so we need to start really saying, okay, hold their feet to the fire. Like, come on, it's just insanity to continue to do this. People are being harmed. Really are.
Absolutely. And Donna, you're right. Hold them to the fire, hold their feet to the fire. I mean, it comes back to the point that came up earlier about accountability. Our elected officials need to be accountable to the communities they serve, and not just a segment of that community, not just the real estate developers, not just the people who have a lot of money to contribute to their campaigns. They need to be accountable to the people, and especially the people whose needs are not being met in the current system. So we only have, we have two questions. So there's one question that was asked in the chat just about additional resources about homelessness and housing instability rates for folks. A great source for some additional statistics is Coalition for the Homeless. They do an annual report on the state of homelessness in the city, and that has some great statistics about the number of people going into shelter who are released from jail or prison. You know, and those statistics are frightening. And we also know, of course, that 50% of people released from prison upstate enter the shelter system in New York City. These numbers are real, and they're big, and they're addressable. And then we have one other question I see in the chat. Is housing discrimination based on conviction history a nationwide issue? Have other cities passed similar legislation to end this? And is the Fair Chance Housing Act gaining support in City Council? So I can answer some of those questions, but does anyone have any thoughts on this being a nationwide issue? I don't know if any of you guys actually do nationwide work, Donna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in California and other states too, but California, we mirror each other in a lot of things. So California has actually been having this issue, but has started addressing this issue as well. They've started implementing housing opportunities for individuals that have been impacted by incarceration and other things. They're creating housing opportunities. They're actually even creating little modular homes, little small things for them, and putting in it. See, they have space, right? We don't, we're crammed in New York, right? But they have the spaces, the lots for these things. So they're looking at that. And what they've been doing is taking the homeless, it's kind of like it's like being stuck in between a rock and a hard place, because their homeless population is massive, massive. They have homeless encampments downtown LA, all over, different parts of LA. And so what they've been doing is moving them off and then putting them into these spaces. But we're not talking about addressing the mental health in these people, right? What's going on with them, and the physical health with them as well, because they all tied in together. And so I think there's a way to do both of those at the same time, because the people feel harmed, right? Those that are homeless and that they're throwing into these and putting them in rightfully, I think that's fine. But you also have to look at the mental health with them. So yes, it's being addressed. It's on a national scale. There are lots of states in this country. There's so much, Atlanta, there's Chicago. I've been around, and I cannot tell you how crazy it is. And the pandemic only made it worse. We have to acknowledge that COVID, the pandemic, really made exacerbated this homeless situation. And so yes, it's a national issue. It is being addressed in other states. New York could do better. We are the most progressive, so-called progressive, but we're doing nothing to touch it at all.
Yeah, absolutely, Donna. And you're right, California has been a real leader on this. So there's about over a dozen cities that have passed fair chance for housing laws across the country, in addition to New Jersey as an entire state recently passed and implemented a fair chance law. In California, Berkeley and Oakland have, I think, the best examples of fair chance laws, and also Seattle, Washington has an excellent fair chance law. These fair chance laws run the gamut in what they cover and how much impact they have. So in Berkeley and Oakland and Seattle, most landlords are prohibited from doing background checks, period. They can't get the information. They have to make decisions about their renters without that stigma based on all the other information that a person brings to them. It doesn't mean that a landlord can't look at a person's character references, their finances, their rental history. They can still look at all of those other things, but they can't use that background check. And we know just the stigma is so overwhelming. So I think they have the examples of the most far-reaching laws that have the most impact. In other jurisdictions, the laws are not quite as strong. And so some of those laws will limit how far back in a person's history you can look. So you can only consider convictions in the past 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And the unfortunate part of those laws is that they don't help people who have more recently exited incarceration, which is often the time when people have the most need. And so those laws are limited in that way. And then there's jurisdictions that have laws that say you can't have a blanket ban that you won't rent to someone who has a conviction history, but you can still consider someone's criminal history. You just have to look at the offense type, and you have to look at a person's mitigating evidence. And in jurisdictions that have those laws, we hear that they're not very impactful, that at the end of the day, the stigma really wins out, and that a lot of those laws will say, you can't have a blanket ban on people who have convictions. You have to look at whether they would be a threat to safety or a threat to property. And the unfortunate part about that is that you can make a valid connection between almost any crime and property or safety. I think people make those logical jumps all of the time, and so you'll see in states like that someone who has a conviction for shoplifting, they can still deny them housing because they'll say, well, that could impact my property because they've stolen before, right? And that's the problem with these weak laws, is that at the end of the day, they don't really end discrimination. And they usually require a lot of work on the part of housing providers, because they will require housing providers to go through an entire process, to fill out paperwork, to consider all of these other things. And for those jurisdictions that limit the number of years, what happens is you get a background check and it's someone's full background history. And then you're telling them, okay, but you can only consider the conviction that was in the past 3 years. So you're also telling landlords, you have to forget what you've seen on someone and only consider this certain piece of information. So I think there's a lot of holes in the laws that have been passed, with Berkeley and Oakland and Seattle being kind of the best examples of what we can do. The law that we've been pushing here in New York City is modeled on those Berkeley and Oakland laws. It is a stronger law because we have our own experience here in New York from the Fair Chance Act for Employment, that is a ban the box law, that helps people get their foot in the door because the employer can't do a background check right at the beginning of the process. They have to wait till they make an offer. But I think the experience has been that even after they make the offer and do the background check, people aren't getting the jobs. And we've seen a lot from the Commission on Human Rights, who has to enforce that law, that there's just a lot of litigation because employers aren't actually following that law. So part of our strategy here is just to cut the information off at the source. Kandra said it, background check companies are an industry. They're out there to make money. They're not out there to provide even a good product. Background checks are riddled with errors. There's litigation around it. It's a money industry, and we just need to cut the information off at source to give people a real chance. And then the third part of the question that I'll answer too is the Fair Chance Act gaining support in City Council? So we have an opportunity because 2/3 of our City Council are new this year. They're brand new babies in office. We had an election at the end of the year, and a lot of our existing City Council members who were supportive, we did have great support with our last City Council. They've been term limited. And so we have new folks that we're working with. I know I've had great conversations with council members. I don't know, Kandra, do you want to jump in? I know you've talked to some of your City Council members. You want to talk a little bit about the support?
Yeah, I think it's when you phrase it around how this really improves public safety, because it provides people with stability, and we know that's the quickest way to reducing recidivism. I think when you phrase it like that, it often helps. So I've had a lot of conversations with new council members as well, where it seems very promising. I think where we get stuck still is the people with the pockets who donate the most are often those real estate developers that are millionaires and billionaires, and also community members that have been heads of civic association and tenant associations for 30 plus years, are still kind of very far removed, even when you talk about mental health and substance use, let alone about conviction histories. So I feel like there's, it's starting to be that new generation that's kind of coming on board, even at kind of the community level. And I think that's really beautiful, because there is still some, conservative hearts out there that really like to see things back in the 80s. And we know from facts that it's just so false. But I think it's kind of stuck in their way. So it's all of our jobs, like every single person in this world needs to be out there talking not only to your council person, but your neighbor, your family member, your community member, the store owner. I mean, like it is really about collectively changing hearts and minds in that community, because, we are all very adamant to get this passed this year. So the more help we can get to speak with everyone and kind of help educate folks, and the more town halls we can keep doing and events like this, I think it's going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I put a link in the chat. You can send a message to your own City Council member. If you don't know who your City Council member is, go to that link and there's a place to put in your address. It'll tell you who your city council member is and give you an opportunity to send them a message directly. They really do need to hear from people in their districts that we should pass fair chance for housing. With that, I want to do one final closeout question for our panelists. I want to bring it back to women and women who have been impacted by incarceration. And for a moment, let's imagine a future where there are 0 women incarcerated in New York City, none, where we have closed the Rose M. Singer Center, which, this isn't a future that has to be far off. I think we said that, I think Kandra said it or Leah said it, there's like 250, 300 women incarcerated in the Rose M. Singer Center. We have the money to invest the resources to end the incarceration of women in New York City. But I'd like our panelists to give me a list of what we have to do to get there. What role does housing play in that pathway? And what do we need to do to end the incarceration of women, thereby ending the impact on children, the impact on communities that we talked about in the beginning, that widespread reverberating impact of what happens when we incarcerate the women in our communities. So what do we have to do to end the incarceration of women? What do we have to do around housing to make that happen? And any other final words you want to add in? So Marilyn, I'll go to you first.
I believe that the intentional organization of advocates in the communities are needed to unify all of the narratives that we just discussed. We need mental health treatment, we need moral support, we need health care, we need child care. There's so many things that we need in order to secure a flourishing life. And the main one being housing. The main one being housing.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I'll add to that real quick and just, I'm gonna hit on the most common sense thing of what we could do, kind of the quickest, the easiest, the fastest. So pass fair chance for housing, because if we don't pass that, everything else that we're talking about today is really just lip service. And B, kind of going back to what we know about the population of women that are on Rosie's. 86% suffer from serious mental health concerns. If we were to create supportive housing, we could reduce the population by 86% right then and there. And that is like common sense. It's fiscally responsible. It's morally responsible. And that would be a great start. Then we can worry about the percentage that's still left, right? But that's such a high percentage. It would be, in my opinion, the best way to kind of start that conversation. Even like, let's create it. It's not that many units. You're talking about 250 to 300, like, so when you're thinking about the amount of units, also the money is there. Instead of investing in solutions that don't work, such as the Department of Corrections and NYPD, take that money that you're trying to give to them and put it into supportive housing. And we could, significantly reduce almost 90% of the women that are on the island right now.
Thanks, Kandra. Donna, go ahead.
I want to say, numbers, stats, figures, all that's great. It backs up our argument, but let's just stick with the humanity of it all. Just give people a place to sleep, to lay their heads, to feel safe. Let's just be as simple as that. Just be human beings, caring for other human beings. Again, no one's perfect. That doesn't even matter. Just give people a place to lay their heads so they don't have to worry. Simple as that. There's enough space. There's enough for everyone. We have this mentality of lack, that things don't exist. Like, we have to fight for it. We have to do so much. We have to damn near stab each other in the back for it. It's not true. It's false. It's so false. Simply just give people a place to sleep. Period.
Thank you, Donna. And then finally, let's go to Leah, who is a leader in the Beyond Rosie's campaign. This is your lifeblood.
I have to say, Kandra, you said 86%. I said, well, if we add the 77% that are DV survivors, I said we would just really evacuate the whole building, But, it's right. It's like really pulling away from criminalizing people and humanizing people, and healing people, because that's what it's going to take. Because I really don't believe that any woman, wakes up and says, oh, I want to go to jail today. It's trauma involved. Like I said, mental illness is real, trauma is real. And if we put people first and we keep the focus on people, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong because people are that's what's needed, to support the people, to reinvest, to decarcerate, and to provide the unique resources that women need, whether it be to reunite them with their family, whether it be to provide them with the mental health services they need, whether it be to provide them with job readiness skills. You have to, like I always say, you have to fill their tool belt. You have to armor them up, because like I said, once you empower women, you empower communities. Once you heal women, you heal communities. And then we're going to have the recidivism rate decreasing. Then we're going to have the decarceration happening. Then we're going to have community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Marilyn, Leah, Donna, Kandra. You guys are amazing. It's always wonderful to be in space with you talking about this stuff. I appreciate it so much. Appreciate all of you and appreciate those who attended today. Just one final call. Remember, go to fairchancehousing.org. Click the Take Action button. Tell your council member we need to pass Fair Chance for Housing. You can sign up for our email updates if you're not already a member of the campaign and getting our emails. Appreciate everyone and thank you so much for your time. Together we can change the world. Let's do it.
Okay. It was a great panel. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Right.